Morning, everybody. It's 9 o'clock. Time to begin our Bible class. Appreciate the presence of everyone. Good to have Brother Cole with us. The questions will be up on the screen, but if you would like a copy of the questions, Norm P., if you'll raise your hand, Norm P. will get you a copy. We'll be doing lessons 5 and getting into 6. Studying the book of Esther this morning. All right, so just as a way of a reminder, our 17 time periods before the flood, the scattering of the people, the patriarchs, the Exodus, the wandering in the wilderness, invasion and conquest of Canaan, the judges, the united kingdom, the divided kingdom, Judah alone, the captivity, return from captivity, years of silence, the life of Christ, the early church, and the letters to the Christians. So again, as way of reminder, we are studying through the book of Esther, so we're kind of taking a jump from studying what's happening in Jerusalem and going back up to seeing what's happening in Persia. And so this is still under the return of Zerubbabel, and you can see Esther right here falls right in line under the reign of Xerxes or Ahasuerus. And we mentioned this last week, but when we look at the story of Esther, and I think I mentioned this last week, Elise was asking, like, why do we keep jumping around? Why can't we just finish Ezra? Why we got to jump around? Well, it's because Esther literally fits right in between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7. We know in Ezra chapter 6, as we've already studied, the temple was completed, and this was about 516 BC. We see that over in Ezra chapter 6 and verse 15. And then the next return that we'll talk about, of course, is the return of Ezra. And we see the timing of that now in Ezra chapter 7, verses 8 and 9. And so Esther actually fills that gap between those two events. And Esther itself takes about a 10-year period. So again, this is a very integral part of the story of the children of Israel. Obviously, if we didn't have Esther and Haman got his way, then there would be no more Jews. And so if you look here, this is where, of course, the people have returned, rebuilt the temple, and Susa is where Esther is taking place, and so it's much, much further east than we find the remnant that is in Israel or in Jerusalem at this time. And one of the things that we pointed out, one of the unique things, the unique features of the book of Esther is God's name's never mentioned at all. We don't see any prayers. We don't see any sacrifices being made. There are no prophets that are speaking on behalf of God. There's no direct divine speech that we see coming from God. And yet God is throughout the entire book. And I think when we look at the book of Esther, if we're looking at it kind of as a whole, we see that God keeps his promises. We see that Mordecai had complete faith in that. God preserves his people in his timing and in his way, and God is still ruling over the affairs of men. So as we started lesson 5 last week, we talked just a little bit about Queen Vashti and turning down or refusing the king's command to come in to her and show herself off to himself and to all of his buddies. And the fact that just because wives are told to submit to their husbands doesn't necessarily mean in all things. And I think that one of the key points that we need to take away from this is over in Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 22, it specifically says that wives are to submit as to the Lord. And so that's the key thing that we need to take away from that. So we're picking up now in question number 2 from lesson 5. So trace the sequence of events that led to Esther becoming queen. What details in Esther 2 emphasize how little control Esther had over the circumstances of her life. So what can we glean from Esther chapter 2 and the story of how Esther ends up where she ends up? Francis?
She was one of the chosen that the king was looking for. She was groomed in a way to be the one that won the prize, and everything happened. She had no choice in the matter.
Okay, yeah, she herself was chosen. She was told, this is what you're going to do. She didn't necessarily have a choice there in verse 8 of chapter 2. It says that she was taken into the harem. So they didn't invite her. She didn't get some fancy invitation and say, hey, would you like to be a part of this? She was taken. What else? Lena?
For your same sequence, so I wrote, young virgins were cold. Esther was brought to the palace. She was prepared for the king. She could not go to the king unless she was called by name. And another part of, she had no control. She obeyed Mordecai, was his command.
Okay. So outside of even before Mordecai, what do we see kind of in her story that would kind of even more emphasize her lack of control and what was going on? Daddy?
The fact that Vashti was removed as queen.
So Vashti's removed. So now a new queen is going to be sought. Jesse?
I just backed up to the fact that she was brought up in the capital city as a result of her family having been brought there during the Babylonian captivity. Then she lost her parents evidently at a relatively young age because her older cousin Mordecai ends up raising her as his daughter. And then, of course, leading to everything else I think that's been said.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole lot that is going on here, all the way back to the location of where she is at, the fact that she is an orphan. And yet, throughout all of this, one of the things that I think is emphasized, especially in chapter 2, is that Esther found favor. And so, regardless of the fact that she didn't have a whole lot of control over what was going on, she was finding favor in all of the places that she found herself. And we'll talk about the providence of God with another question, but I think that this is one of those situations where God is operating through all of these circumstances, even though Esther doesn't necessarily have any choice in these things. And I just think that as we see the story unfolding here from where she started to becoming queen is quite something. All right, question number 3. What did Mordecai do while sitting at the king's gate, and why is it significant that his action was recorded but not rewarded at the time? Miss Shirley?
Well, he was sitting at the gate and he heard the two men plotting to kill the king.
All right, so he's listening and here's this treacherous plot unfolding where they're seeking to assassinate the king there at the end of chapter 2. What else?
He told Esther, and then Esther told the king, but the king didn't honor him at that time.
Okay. So what's significant about that? So it's verified that this actually did happen, and it's recorded, and it says that it's written in the King's Book of Chronicles there in verse 22, but there's no immediate reward, which obviously, I shouldn't say obviously, which was very unique in Persia at this time. If somebody is going to do something like this, typically it's going to be an immediate reward. These people are going to be rewarded for what had just happened, but that didn't happen in this situation. Why is that unique? Daddy?
Well, the fact that where Haman come into play, it affected his demise, I guess, later on.
Okay. So go ahead, Norm.
Mordecai didn't do it for the reward. He did it because it was the right thing to do, even though he's a foreigner living in this foreign country. He doesn't know the king, but he knew Esther, and he knew Esther's relationship now with the king, and so he's just doing the right thing. I find it interesting. He's just doing the right thing.
Yeah, he is just doing the right thing. I think it's interesting because this obviously is going to come into play in Esther chapter 6. And I think, again, we see God's timing in all of this, and the reward that is going to be given to Mordecai at a later date, at a very important time. Anything else on number 3? All right, question number 4. Why did Haman's anger toward Mordecai expand into a plan to destroy all the Jews? And how does the text explicitly identify Haman's relationship to God's people? This is over in chapter 3. Miss Shirley?
Well, Mordecai wouldn't bow down to him, and so it made him very angry, and that's why when he came up with this scheme to get rid of all
Okay, yeah, there in verse 5 said, when Haman saw that Mordecai neither bowed down nor paid homage to him, Haman was filled with rage. So, what do we know about Haman and his background? Norm?
He's an Agagite,
Okay,
which is a descendant of King Agag, which was the famous king that did not get killed like he was supposed to, in the manner in which he was supposed to, back in the days of the kings, back at Saul.
yep, all right. So he was an Agagite, and some of the stuff that I read, that's one of the biggest stories that you read, is connecting him back with King Agag. But an Agagite was also a term that was used by Jewish writers in the first century to refer to Romans. And so it's possible that could be as well. But I think the thing that is very clearly spelled out that we see in verse 10, where Haman was described not only as an Agagite, but he was described as an enemy of the Jews. Now it would make sense because of the situation of what took place in Samuel's day with Saul there and King Agag. But either way, it says that he was an enemy of the Jews there in verse 10. And so I think that one of the things that's interesting about this is obviously they're not in their own land. They're in captivity, and they're facing opposition now, not necessarily because of their actions, but just because of their identity, because of who they are now. And Haman's like, nah, this ain't gonna work. Question number 5. The text does not explain why Vashti refused, why Mordecai would not bow, or why Esther initially hesitated. What does this teach us about how Scripture expects us to handle unanswered questions in biblical narratives? Norm?
This is one of the things I find interesting about Esther is she's so understated. The character is so understated, and she's the result of godly upbringing. And all of her actions and everything, up until she has to make her own decision, the biggest decision of her life later on. Up until then, she's just being a good daughter, wife. I mean, she's just carrying on the results of the good upbringing. So that therein lies the power of following God's word, and as parents, as children. And for the children, it's great because you have the idea that I don't know what decisions I'm going to make in my life, and I don't know what my life's going to have, in store for me. But if I follow God's word and just follow the good teaching, if my parents are following God's word, that I'm going to be okay.
Okay, that's a great point. So one of the reasons that I put this question in there is for my own sake, because oftentimes we read these stories, and me anyways, it's like I want to know more. I want to know, well, why did they do this, or well, why aren't we told this? And so oftentimes what can happen in those situations is we have the information that we have, and we start trying to fill in the gaps ourselves, and we're not told the gaps. And so this is a reminder for me, I can't ever just fill in the gaps with what I would like the thing to be, and I have to stick with what is told. And one of the things I have highlighted, and this is from years and years ago, I remember highlighting Deuteronomy 29:29 in my Bible. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our sons forever, that we may observe all the words of this law. And we're not intended to fill the gaps. And so we just have to be careful that when we aren't told things, when we can't just assume motives on the fact or on the part of these people. I'm also reminded of Proverbs 35:6. Every word of God is tested. He is a shield to those who take refuge in him. Do not add to his words, or he will reprove you, and you will be proved a liar. And I remember from years ago, I was listening to John in one of his sermons, and it was something in the New Testament. I don't remember the exact context, but he had questions. And I remember him saying, well, when we get to heaven, we can ask, whoever it was. And that may be the case, but we cannot make our own assumptions within God's word. Now, I think that we are very fortunate to have these stories, and they should help increase our faith. But we also have to be reminded that we walk by faith, not by sight. And so just because we're not told something doesn't mean that should weaken our faith. Francis?
Well, it goes along with speak when the Bible speaks and be silent when the Bible is silent. If God felt like that was important information for the rest of the story, it would have been there.
Todd?
Yeah, I think it's interesting how the Jews might point to Mordecai. Later on, you've got, in the New Testament, you got Simon the Zealot, who's anti-Roman. You got Matthew the tax collector, who's kind of a willing participant in the Roman scheme. And they can both point to Mordecai. Because Mordecai, well, he helped the king. He sat in the gate and helped the king. So he's even wicked Xerxes deserves protection. But then over here, he won't bow to Haman. So we should resist. And it's like, well, these are situations that we find ourselves in when we're living among the world, and we've got to be careful not to be too dogmatic.
Yeah. Lena?
I'm just arguing with you as always. It says, text does not explain. I thought that Esther very clearly told Mordecai, I just don't want to be killed, because if I just go to the king without being told, as everybody else, I'm going to get put to death. Yes, he explains to her later, but well, if you don't stand up, you will perish as well. And here now she sees that she's between two death sentences, which one she chooses. But I thought that she clearly said, I don't want to be killed. And with the Mordecai, well, at least I understood in verse 4, Mordecai told them that he was a Jew. And we know, like with Daniel and all his friends, they didn't bow down. And this is why I figured Haman hated all the Jews. Because, well, maybe all the Jews wouldn't bow to him.
Sure, fair point. Fair point. And I've admitted before, I don't do a very good job with writing questions. And you may have a hard time understanding my intent. I had this conversation with Wyatt yesterday because he was working on his questions for the high school class. And I told him, I don't know what Mr. Jesse's looking for. I can tell you what I think. You just have to do the best that you can. So I apologize if it wasn't clear. I guess my point is there are certain situations, even within the story of Esther, we don't have all of the details of why they made the decisions that they made, why they acted the way that they acted, and we have to be respectful of what we are told and not try to fill in the gaps. Go ahead, Norm.
This is one of the reasons I love this particular account so much is because it deals with the providence of God, and we deal with the providence of God every day, and it's those unknowns there that could challenge our faith. Oh, how come I don't know this? Why can't I plan and then just have it happen? How could God cause? No. It's follow God's rules, and as a result, if you do, and you are in harmony with the creation, things will work out better. We don't know how exactly they're going to work out, but they will work out better than if you did not.
And they may not work out better immediately.
Right, exactly. But in the long run, it's going to be there. And certainly Esther was in that situation where she's being a great daughter. She's being a great wife. She's doing all these right things. And then all of a sudden, finally, in her life, she ends up with this decision point, and she's prepared to do the right thing as a result.
Let's move on to question number 6. Mordecai tells Esther that deliverance will arise from another place if she remains silent. On what biblical foundation could he speak with such confidence, even when the situation looked hopeless? And this is probably one of the most well-known stories or events that we have in the book of Esther there toward the end of chapter 4 when he is telling Esther this. So what can we learn from that? Where does Mordecai, where does he get this confidence? Gil?
God keeps his promises. We may not know how he's going to keep his promise, but he is, so we just have to trust him.
Okay. So Mordecai obviously knew the promises that had been made. Obviously, God had promised Abraham that his descendants were going to become a great nation, that through them all the families of the earth would be blessed. And so if that's still going to happen, then he's not going to allow the annihilation of his people, for sure. And so that would have nullified God's own promises. And so he had confidence, he had faith, he had trust in God's promises. Norm?
It also brings out the idea that he's presenting to Esther is that we each have to stand up ourselves. It's it's not about what ultimately might happen, but we each individually have to make a decision. That's what he's placing before Esther, is the inevitability of God's promises being fulfilled. That's out there. Do we want to be part of the positive results that are going to be there, or are we going to either do nothing, which is the bad thing, or do the wrong thing? Both of those are bad. 2 out of 3 are bad.
And outside of the fact of remembering these promises, God had over and over again throughout the story of the children of Israel repeatedly saved them, and often very difficult situations, obviously when they're in slavery in Egypt. They're survived in that situation during the days of the judges, and they were constantly being attacked. Obviously the exile and the captivity up to this point. And so you've got this long line of history of God taking care of his people, and this is something that Mordecai could have faith in. Lena?
We'll just add to your story of Hebrew people, and from another place, the story when they came to Promised Land was Moses, and they decided, well, we're not going to go because those people are too big, and then they go back, and 40 years later, the next generation actually goes to Promised Land. God's plan is still fulfilled, but with the other generation of people of Israel.
Yeah. And one of the things that Haman obviously is able to do is look beyond circumstances. And I think that he's trying to help Esther see this. And faith is going to look past, what we see in front of our eyes, and the situation looks pretty grim. But yet faith is going to cause us to look beyond that. Daddy?
I think, Mordecai knew about the providence of God long before we did. He could see the history. He knew the law, not only the law of Moses, but he knew the law of the Persians there as well. In the fact that he sat outside the gate there, and that was just not him sitting. I mean, he was sitting to learn. And of course, that's when he learned about the
plot on the king.
The plot that killed the king. So he could look throughout the history, as has already been brought out, and see the path that God had taken for his people, and knew about providence long before we did.
Yeah. Miss Shirley?
Esther knew that she couldn't go before the king unless he, asked her to come. And Mordecai told her if it didn't come through her, it would come through another source. And I think she made herself present for the king to see, so she would make sure the king requested her to come.
Yeah, and I mean, she had every right to fear in this situation because of the law and the fact that she could have ended up being executed if he didn't hold out the golden scepter. So there's a legitimate fear that we see there. So talking about now God's providence, there in question number 7, though God's name is never mentioned in Esther 1 through 4, and we're just sticking through chapters 1 through 4. We'll get to 5 through 10 later. Where do you see the clear evidence of God's providence shaping events behind the scenes? Be specific. So where do we see God's providence in chapters 1 through 4? Miss Shirley?
Well, they made sure that Esther was picked as one of the women virgins to go. And then through all this, they made sure that she was picked to be queen. So she could say for me.
Okay. Jesse?
Oh, I didn't have anything.
Oh.
I was just letting you know.
Oh, sorry. I saw you. You just scratching your ear. Norm?
Well, her background, the fact that she was raised in a good home, we only see the results of that, but it doesn't really say anything about her upbringing. We just see the results of her upbringing, so we can imply that through God's providence, that He is fulfilling His promise, which is if you follow my law and follow my will, you will have a good result with your children when it's done. And that even works if the children are not your children directly, but you just use that law to raise those children.
Okay. What else? Miss Francis?
Well, with her being brought up in the situation she was, more than likely she knew about God's will, about the history, and about what the future is. We don't know that, but being with Mordecai, he was making sure that she knew that
All right. So yeah, I think that all the way from the beginning, we see God's providence with the things going poorly for Vashti, and then Esther being selected. I think that throughout the process of her selection, we see God's hand and all of this. And throughout these situations, there are no miracles that are being performed, but it really is just through divine strategy and using the circumstances of men. I think that there's some providence even in the secrecy that we see, where Mordecai is telling Esther not to let her Jewish identity be known, and that kind of helps play out now with the story of Haman and then their ultimate deliverance. We talked about with the king how when Haman determines or finds out this plot, and he's not immediately rewarded. I think that is God's providence and the timing, and then ultimately we'll see later with the memory or the king being reminded of that. I think that just with the threat itself and the way that the law was with Persia, that a decree that was made by the king was irreversible. And then the corresponding thing that we see later in chapters 5 through 10. And I think that we see God working through Mordecai multiple times in the confidence that he had. And then ultimately in the moment that we see with Esther, where she's going to go before the king. And so he is all throughout the book. Let me get Daddy, and then I'll get Norm. Go ahead, Daddy.
Another thing too is Haman himself, his self-centeredness. I mean, we mentioned a while ago who he came from, where he came from. But,
Yeah.
that was a bad thing about him, and when he didn't have a repentative heart in the way he was acting, and God, used that self-centeredness to his demise.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I think that we definitely see him working through Haman as well. Norm?
And the way God is working through the king to protect his people, ultimately, because of his choice, the king's choices, he gets the right queen, the queen gives the right advice, he's in the position of power to squash Haman, where somebody else might not have been. And we saw that before in the situation with Cyrus, with Darius, and the different ones where God works through these other worldly leaders to fulfill his will.
Yeah, it's like there's a puzzle that is being fit together just perfectly, but whenever we work on a puzzle, we've got like what the picture is supposed to be, and sometimes it's still very difficult for us to get it, depending on how many pieces it is. But literally, God is using all of these events, and they are fitting together just perfectly because God is governing all of these things, and He is providentially has His hand on all of this, working it to His end and the way that He wants it to work out in His timing. All right, let's grab question number 8. Esther initially responds to Mordecai with fear and caution, and Mordecai reminds her that her position does not grant immunity from suffering. What do these responses together teach us about the relationship between fear, wisdom, faith, and the false security of comfort or influence when obedience involves real danger? So obviously the fear is real. And I think that that's understandable, because approaching the king does carry a death penalty if he is not willing to hold out the golden scepter. And so that is something that is real. I mean, that was a legitimate thing. But yet she continued to act.
Shirley's got it.
Go ahead, Miss Shirley.
Well, too, she had them to call all the Jews together to pray, for her and their people. Shows her faith and that she's going to stand up and do what she needs to do, because she made a comment, if I perish, I perish. So she's determined to do whatever it takes to try to save her faith.
Yeah, and I think that shows an enormous amount of wisdom even on her part, that she doesn't just rush into the action. She does have this fear, and Mordecai's like, hey, if it ain't you, it's going to be somebody. And she could have just, all right, I'm going to do it. But no, she takes that time and asks for this period of fasting. And so I think that shows a certain amount of wisdom in and of itself there. she wasn't acting reckless, and her faith wasn't reckless as well. What else? Todd?
You never see an attitude of, well, God is going to protect me because I'm his child. It's the same attitude of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Later on is Paul. You know, it's just, if I go to Jerusalem and die, then that's God's will. I don't hold my own life as a precious possession to me.
Yeah. Norm?
And also, this particular circumstance brings out the fact that you're keeping your lineage a secret. That's not a security.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, that has been something they've been banking on. And just things that you think you're keeping secret, they are not a security.
So over in Psalm 56, verse 3, it says, when I am afraid, I will put my trust in you. And so there are going to be situations where we're going to have to face fear. 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of discipline. And so faith is, we're going to choose obedience regardless of the risk that we might be involved with. Daddy?
One other thing too is, she was young, and I think we see that in young people today. I mean, fear, can be overwhelming to them, but that's where, again, the parent, the guardian, as Mordecai was, can help instruct and teach them to all of this. I mean, older people have fear as well, but, we learn through age and time, that how to overcome a lot of that if we continue to be faithful. Another example to add to that was the apostles there, all the apostles in Acts. There were several that were in prison, but their decision had been made that they would, speak, for God rather than man.
So when I think about the encouragement that Mordecai is bringing to Esther, he's really helping her to confront the hard truth that, silence may feel safer, and that may be the same for us. Silence may feel safer, but that's not faithful. And this is something that Jesus was even teaching his disciples, that following him, it's not going to be easy, and it may even involve loss of life. But yet our faith is going to require obedience over fear. All right, let's grab question number 9. Esther says, if I perish, I perish only after calling for fasting and unity among God's people. What does this teach us about faithful obedience when outcomes are uncertain? And how should that shape our own decisions today? Francis?
Well, it also goes along with where it's God's will, and she has the faith in knowing that if she dies, she will still be pleasing, because that was his will. It wasn't, and with Jesus, he knew what his Father's will was, and he asked for that to be taken away, but he knew that if it couldn't, and if it couldn't, then it's still God's will. He had to obey. And she's in the same situation here, knowing as much as she knew about her people, and Mordecai is ensuring her that God is in control. Whether she is obedient to her position, it's still going to happen. And she understands that, and with the fasting, she's reassuring that I'm doing all I can to be sure that God is pleased with the situation that I'm doing.
Yes. And I think that's a key thing, because when she says, if I perish, she's not going to God and demanding a specific outcome. It's like, well, I'll do this, but you better take care of me. And I don't think this is a flippant, if I perish, I perish. I don't think it's like, okay, I'll do it. And if I die, I die, whatever. No, I think it's, you know what? I'm going to do this. And if I die, I die. That the outcome is going to be what it's going to be, but I'm going to remain faithful. And so, again, in our own lives, faithful obedience is not going to ask for guarantees. It's like, well, I'll be faithful to God if. No, we're going to be faithful to God regardless of the outcome. Daddy?
The other thing here too is, she was asking for help. She was asking the people. And I think this, through God's wisdom, the church itself. That's why we have a congregation here of God's people. When weep when others weep, and we're happy when others are happy, and when others have trials and difficulties, we strengthen each other. And so I think we see a good example of that here. Esther realized that she couldn't do this alone, and I mean, that's kind of what your picture's depicting there as well.
Yeah, and I think that if you think about it from the people's standpoint, there's maybe a certain amount of, there's probably a lot of fear even from their standpoint. It's like our hands, or our lives are in the hands of Esther. And so we are a part of this, and we need her faithfulness in this situation because we could lose our life. I saw another hand in the middle.
I
Lena?
had the same point that when you choose to follow God, you are never alone. Elijah was worried that he was alone, and God showed him how many were prophets. And Esther here fears for her own life, and then realizes all nation prays with her and fasts with her.
Yeah, and there's a lot of them still spread out all over. Daddy?
I wanted to bring up Hebrews 10:23-25 on this. It says, let us hold fast the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful, and let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good works. And we do that, of course, through not forsaking the assembly.
Yeah. Todd?
I think this is a good example of denying self and taking up your cross. Our cross may be different than Jesus' cross, but it's when you have that opportunity to suffer for God's will, you need to take it. And he says, who knows whether you have not attained royalty for such a time as this. If you were in Esther's shoes, would you feel like, boy, I won the lottery here. I'm the queen, or I'm in this great, powerful position. God's really blessed me, and then just forget God? It may be for a specific purpose. We have to deny the blessings on ourselves and be willing to not suffer.
Yeah, good point. Anything else on lesson 5? All right, we'll jump on into lesson 6 from Esther chapters 5 through 10. And question number 1 says in Esther 5:1-8, Esther approaches the king and invites him and Haman to 2 banquets instead of immediately presenting her request. What details in the text help us understand Esther's action and the sequence of events leading up to her request?
I thought the king, of course, she found favor in the king's sight, and then the banquet was prepared to the king with wine and all that. And he asked her, what petition she wanted, and she was careful not to say right then what her true petition was.
Okay, so of course she had asked for 3 days, and then there at the beginning of chapter 5, and that came about on the 3rd day that Esther put on her royal robes, and so she's waiting this 3rd day, and I don't know if this may be one of them situations where maybe reading too much into it, but there's a lot of 3rd days that we see throughout scriptures, especially with the Old Testament, and deliverance on the 3rd day. Abraham reaches Mount Moriah on the 3rd day there in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 4. Jacob escapes Laban after 3 days. Jonah's delivered, of course, after 3 days. Hosea speaks of restoration on the 3rd day in Hosea chapter 6 verse 2. So I think it's a little interesting, just a tidbit. And so now it's on the 3rd day, and we see Esther now going to act with this courage. But what do we take away from the fact that she's asking for these banquets and doesn't just immediately, she's given the golden scepter, she could have just let it be known, but why do you think she didn't do that? Who is she trying to get to be a part of everything? Yeah, I think that this is intentional with what she is doing here, that she's delaying her request rather than immediately exposing the decree that had happened, and I think that is all part of God's timing as well, where she's doing this, waiting for them to be able to partake in this banquet together. And I think that she's taking advantage of, as we've already mentioned, Haman's pride in the situation. All right, question number 2. After the first banquet, Haman rejoices but becomes enraged when he sees Mordecai. What does the text emphasize about Haman's mindset And how do his words and actions reveal what truly governs his heart? Francis?
He was a truly jealous person, and he wanted to be number one, and if anybody could be taken out, put him there, he was willing to do it.
Okay. Whenever he leaves there in verse 9, it says, Then Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. He's excited. But, and so he's got this, he's very unstable. I guess I'll say that. And although he's got all of these reasons, and if you want to know the reasons, just ask him why he's, should be joyful. He's got all of these things to be prideful about, to be joyful about, but yet he's got one unmet desire that is just eating him up. And so his own heart, or his own confession about this situation, I think just reveals his heart. He's got this wealth, he's got this great family, he's got these promotions, and yet he says in verse 13, all of this does not satisfy me. Norm?
It kind of reminds me of Ahab and Naboth and the vineyard.
Yep.
The pouting that was going on was really over the top.
Oh, there's more than just that, and that's one of the things I had in my notes here. I think that this really does mirror King Ahab's response to Naboth's vineyard. And in both situations, you've got a powerful man that can't tolerate being refused. And it's like, I want this. You should give this to me. And also in both situations, we've got a spouse that is encouraging murder to fix the problem. So you can fix this. You can take care of this. Yeah, we know that his pride and his disdain for the Jews and specifically Mordecai has caused this situation. Daddy?
This is the same word, rage, that was used there in chapter 3 and verse 5 when he first describes his rage against Mordecai. And that word means filled with fury, was furious, burned with anger, and flew into a rage. And so that describes the mindset that he had.
He has no contentment. He has an enormous amount of pride. And I think that one of the things that we see with pride is you're not able to really enjoy the blessings that you have. And he most certainly did not. And he has, although he has all these things, he still has this other desire that is ruling his heart and is going to ultimately be his downfall. All right, we'll pick up with question number 3. Not next week, but the following Sunday after the meeting. Thanks, everybody.